I used to think the house would always smell like rosemary and coffee. That's how Raymond liked it, earthy, warm, alive. Even when he passed, I tried to keep that scent in the air, like it might somehow keep the walls from turning cold. But smells fade when laughter fades, and laughter left this place a long time ago. Now, every corner feels staged. Too clean, too curated, like a photograph in a magazine instead of a home. Clara likes it that way. She says it looks modern and minimalist, but to me, it feels like emptiness wearing perfume. Even the sunlight doesn't settle here anymore, it glances off the marble countertops and leaves, like it's been told it's not welcome to linger. My name is Eleanor Vale, and I've been a guest in my own home for a little over a year now. I wasn't supposed to move in with them permanently. It was supposed to be temporary, just until you get your strength back, Adam said. That was after I fell on the kitchen tiles of my old house, the one Raymond built with his own 2 hands. I'd fractured my hip, and the doctor recommended I not live alone for a while. Adam had sounded so earnest when he offered. Mom, it's safer here. You'll have us. Clara and I can help. Help. That's a funny word when you realize it can mean anything depending on who says it. Sometimes help means comfort, other times, it means control. The first night I arrived, Clara hugged me with that soft, sweet-smelling embrace she saves for other people's eyes. Oh, Eleanor, we're so glad to have you, she said, her voice dripping with rehearsed warmth. But her eyes flicked toward the carpet, toward the small trail of my suitcase wheels, and I saw her jaw tighten. It wasn't hatred, that would have been honest. No, it was something worse. It was inconvenience. They put me in the smallest room in the house, the one near the laundry area. Clara had repainted it in gray and white tones, with a dainty twin bed pushed up against the wall. There was no closet, just a small dresser. She'd even set a vase of fake tulips on the nightstand, as if to say, see, we made an effort. I remember touching one of those petals that first night. Cold plastic, dusted at the tips. I thought about real tulips, how they used to fill my old garden, swaying in the wind, brushing against my hands when I watered them each morning. Raymond always said they looked like little cups for sunlight. I missed that warmth more than I missed anything else. The first few weeks weren't unbearable. Adam would come home from work, sit on the edge of the couch, and talk about his clients. He's an architect, talented, just like his father was. He's got the same dimple in his cheek when he smiles, though I rarely see it these days. Clara runs a small online interior design business. She spends most of her day arranging furniture on her computer and posting pictures of their home. She calls it influencing, which I suppose means convincing strangers that you have a life worth envying. Sometimes she'd ask me to move out of the background if she was taking a picture. Just for the lighting, Eleanor, she'd say with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. I never minded much, or at least I told myself I didn't. But the truth is, being invisible hurts in ways you can't explain. Meals became quieter over time. Clara started serving them on individual plates instead of setting dishes on the table. Portion control, she said. But I knew what it really meant, she didn't want leftovers cluttering her fridge. I cooked once, a simple roast chicken with lemon and herbs, the way Raymond loved it. The smell filled the house, and for the first time, it felt alive again. Clara didn't say much during dinner. She poked at her food, smiled thinly, and later whispered something to Adam in the hallway. I heard him sigh. The next morning, he told me gently, Mom, maybe let Clara handle the cooking. She's particular about the kitchen layout. That was when I stopped using the stove. You learn, over time, to shrink. To speak softly so you're not a burden, to move quietly so you're not in the way. You fold yourself into corners, into silence, until even your presence starts to feel like clutter. I tried to tell myself I was lucky. I had a roof over my head. I had family nearby. That's what everyone says you should want at my age. You're so blessed, my bridge friends from church used to tell me. My kids live across the country and barely call. Blessed. It's such a polite word for surviving disrespect. One afternoon, while Clara was out getting her hair done, I found myself walking through the house, touching the walls. The living room was immaculate, white sofas, gold accents, everything in place. No pictures of me or Raymond anywhere. Only photos of Adam and Clara smiling in matching outfits, holding wine glasses or posing beside some landmark. I found one framed photo of all three of us, taken years ago at Raymond's retirement party. It was tucked inside a drawer. Clara had replaced it with a framed quote that said, "Good vibes only." I laughed, but it came out hollow. Later that evening, Clara came home, perfume heavy in the air, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She was on the phone, her voice sharp with that clipped politeness she uses when gossiping. I was in the kitchen, rinsing a teacup, when I heard her say, "Honestly, she's just there. Taking up space. Adam won't say it, but we both know it. Maybe she can sleep in the garage once we redo the guest room." The words hit me like a slap. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. The hum of the dishwasher, the faint whir of the ceiling fan, maybe it had distorted her tone. But no. She laughed after saying it. That short, dismissive laugh that people use when cruelty feels casual. My hands froze under the running water. I stared at the suds gathering around my fingers. Sleep in the garage. I couldn't move for a minute. It was as though someone had pressed pause on the world. The water overflowed the cup and spilled onto the counter, but I didn't wipe it. I just listened to her voice drifting down the hall, light, unbothered, already talking about some new paint color for the kitchen. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something deeper. Something heavy and final, like the closing of a book you've been pretending to enjoy. When Adam came home later that night, I wanted to tell him what I'd heard. I even walked halfway to the living room, but then I stopped. He looked tired. Clara sat beside him, scrolling on her phone, her head resting on his shoulder. For a moment, they looked happy. And I thought, what's the point? Even if I told him, he'd say I misunderstood, or he'd promise to talk to her, and nothing would change. So instead, I walked back to my little room. The air felt stale, heavy with silence. The walls were bare except for a small shelf where I'd placed a few framed photos, Raymond smiling in his garden, Adam as a boy holding a toy airplane, and one of me, younger and braver, standing beside the half-built house we once dreamed about. I sat on the bed and stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. It made a soft, rhythmic sound, the kind you stop noticing after a while. But that night, it was deafening. I watched it spin round and round, and I thought about all the circles I'd made in my life. Raising a child, building a home, losing a husband, and ending up back where I started, dependent, waiting for permission to exist. I'd been grateful for so long. Grateful for leftovers, for quiet, for not being alone. Grateful for their house, their time, their tolerance. But gratitude that requires you to disappear isn't gratitude, it's surrender. I turned off the lamp, and the room fell into shadow. The tulips on the nightstand glowed faintly under the moonlight, perfect, lifeless, and still pretending to be something real. I whispered into the dark, maybe it's time to stop being grateful. And for the first time in years, that thought didn't scare me. It made me feel alive. When I was 24, I thought the world was small enough to hold in the palm of my hand, and big enough to build something beautiful on. Raymond used to joke that I had too much faith for one person. "You'd bet the sun will rise even on a stormy night," he'd say, grinning under that crooked work hat of his. He wasn't wrong. I was young, in love, and foolish enough to believe hard work could protect you from heartbreak forever. The land where the house stood was mine long before it had a foundation. My parents bought it after the war, just a stretch of dusty California earth with an oak tree in the center. When they passed, I inherited it, though it didn't feel like an inheritance. It felt like a responsibility, a promise to make something out of the soil they'd trusted me with. Raymond and I met at a church fundraiser. I was waitressing at the time, hair pinned up, balancing trays and dreams in equal measure. He was a construction worker, tall and gentle, with hands that always looked like they belonged to someone who'd built something honest. He asked me to dance, even though the only music playing was a leaky radio on the counter. I remember laughing as he spun me around between tables, and he whispered, "One day, I'll build you a house on that land of yours. A home so warm, even the wind will stop to rest there." It sounded like poetry then. Now, it sounds like memory's way of breaking your heart sweetly. We didn't have much. I worked double shifts at a diner on Main Street, 5 a.m. to noon, then again from 5 until close. Raymond spent his days pouring concrete and his nights sketching designs on the back of receipts. We saved every penny, kept it in a jar above the fridge labeled Home Fund. Some nights, when exhaustion set in, I'd tease him, "You sure this house isn't just a myth you tell to keep me working?" He'd smile, rub his calloused hands, and say, "You'll see. You'll be hanging curtains before you know it." And he kept his promise. The first year we broke ground, we had nothing but hope and a borrowed cement mixer. Raymond built the frame with his friends from the crew. I carried wood, mixed paint, and sometimes just stood there, watching him measure every corner with a precision that came from love, not obligation. Every nail he hammered felt like a heartbeat. We didn't need a lot, just a roof, a kitchen big enough for laughter, and a porch where we could watch the seasons change. Raymond built that porch first. Said it was important to start with a place to rest when you're tired. "If you can sit and dream here, the rest will follow," he said. He was right. The rest did follow, slowly, imperfectly, beautifully. The house came alive in pieces. The smell of sawdust and wet cement became our perfume. I remember tracing the outline of what would be the living room and imagining it filled with Christmas mornings, birthday candles, and maybe, one day, the sound of a child's laughter. That laughter arrived sooner than I expected. Adam was born on a warm April morning, right when the wisteria by the window began to bloom. Raymond held him like he was holding the entire world. I still see that look sometimes when I close my eyes, the way love can make even the strongest man tremble. Our life wasn't glamorous, but it was full. The house filled with noise, the good kind. Raymond's radio playing jazz on Sunday mornings, Adam running through the hallways with sticky fingers and wild stories, me burning toast and laughing instead of crying. We had a rule in that house: no one leaves angry, no one eats alone. It worked, most days. The neighborhood was small, friendly back then. The kind of place where everyone knew your dog's name. We hosted potlucks on the porch, built swings in the yard, and watched Adam grow up chasing fireflies under the oak tree my parents planted. That house wasn't just walls, it was a scrapbook of our life. Every scratch on the floor, every dent in the doorframe had a story. When Adam turned 18, he wanted to study architecture. Raymond beamed with pride. "The boy's got it in his blood," he'd say. Adam had that same hunger we once did, the belief that building things made you part of something bigger. I used to bring him lemonade while he studied at the kitchen table, his notebooks covered in sketches of homes he wanted to design someday. Then he met Clara. She came into our lives like a gust of perfume and charm. Beautiful, polite, and endlessly enthusiastic. She worked as an assistant at a design firm back then, bright-eyed, curious about everything. When Adam brought her home for the first time, I remember thinking how well she fit into our kitchen, how she laughed easily with Raymond and complimented the curtains I'd sewn myself. She brought flowers every visit and insisted on helping me wash dishes. I liked her instantly. For their engagement party, she asked if she could help redecorate the backyard. "Just to make it more modern," she said. I didn't mind. She added fairy lights and polished stone planters, and it did look lovely. When Adam married her in that very backyard, I thought I was witnessing the beginning of another lifelong story. For a while, she was sweet, almost too sweet. She'd call me Mom, bring over pastries, ask about my garden. But slowly, subtly, things changed. The compliments turned into suggestions, and the suggestions into corrections. "You know, Eleanor, lighter colors might make the living room feel more open." Or, "That old china set is so vintage, maybe we can replace it with something sleeker." She started using words like upgrade and aesthetic. Raymond would roll his eyes but humor her. "Let her play decorator," he'd whisper to me. "She's just excited." When Raymond passed, Clara's excitement didn't wane, it just shifted. She convinced Adam that I shouldn't live alone. "It's too risky," she said. "We have the space." And she did it with that soft, saccharine tone that made it sound like kindness. Adam agreed, of course. He's always wanted peace. But peace isn't the same as harmony. Sometimes, peace is just quiet resentment in a polished room. When I moved in with them, I brought very little, a few clothes, my wedding photo, Raymond's toolbox, and a small box of important papers. Among them was the property deed. I kept it not because I thought I'd need it, but because it reminded me of what we'd built. I used to take it out sometimes, run my fingers over my name printed at the top. Eleanor Vale. It was a reminder that even though life had shrunk me into something smaller, once, I was the foundation of something bigger. It's funny how a piece of paper can carry more weight than a lifetime of words. Adam never asked about it. Maybe he assumed he owned the house now, or maybe he just didn't care. I never corrected him. What was the point? It was family. Families share things, right? That's what I believed for most of my life. But now, looking back, I realize that belief cost me pieces of myself. Every compromise, every silence, every moment I swallowed hurt because I wanted to keep peace, they all built a different kind of wall. One I never meant to construct. Sometimes, late at night, I still dream. Of those early days, of Raymond's laughter echoing off empty studs, of paint-stained hands and shared sandwiches on the porch floor. I dream of the house before it had walls, before it learned to trap things inside, words, regrets, ghosts. In the morning, I wake up in my small room, surrounded by gray paint and silence, and I can almost hear young me whispering from the past, "You built this with love. Don't let them take that away from you." That night, after Clara's garage remark replayed in my head for the 100th time, I opened my drawer. The old framed deed sat there, corners worn, the ink slightly faded but clear enough to read. My name. My home. My history. I traced it with my fingertip, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I felt ownership, not just of land or walls, but of the story itself. I built that home with love, I whispered, my voice shaking. I never thought it'd turn into a cage built from silence. The paper rustled softly under my hand, as if agreeing. And in that moment, under the weak lamplight of a room too small for the life I'd lived, I began to remember who I was before the house had walls. Clara's voice had a way of sounding cheerful when she was being cruel. It was like she'd mastered the art of saying hurtful things in a tone meant for birthday parties. That morning, she stood in the kitchen with a glossy brochure in her manicured hands, rattling off details of their upcoming trip. Italy, Mom, she said brightly, her smile wide enough to hide any trace of sincerity. 2 whole weeks, Florence, Rome, Venice. We've needed this for so long. I nodded, pretending enthusiasm I didn't feel. It sounds wonderful. Adam came up behind her, wrapping an arm around her waist. We thought we'd finally take the plunge. Clara's been planning this for months. I can tell, I said, watching how her nails gleamed like pearls against his shirt. You've earned it. Oh, and don't worry, Clara added, sipping her green juice. We've arranged for meals to be delivered while we're gone, so you won't need to cook. You just heat them up, super easy. And, she hesitated, pretending to glance at her calendar on the counter. We'll have the cleaner come by on Wednesdays. She'll be deep cleaning the living room and kitchen, so maybe just stay out of the way those mornings, okay? She moves fast, and I don't want anything misplaced. She said it with a laugh, but the edge in her tone wasn't subtle. Adam didn't say anything. He just kissed her temple and murmured something about packing. I stood there in the middle of that beautiful, soulless kitchen, holding my teacup like it was the only thing keeping me upright. 2 weeks. Alone. They didn't ask if I'd be lonely, or if I needed anything. Clara just handed me a sheet of paper with instructions, meal delivery times, emergency numbers, which plants to mist, which to leave alone. At the bottom, she'd even written, "Please don't move things around." I folded the paper and tucked it under the fruit bowl. Of course, I said softly. Enjoy your trip. She smiled, relieved I hadn't made it awkward. You're the best, Eleanor. Really? And just like that, I became a footnote in their vacation itinerary. The morning they left, the house was buzzing with luggage wheels and perfume. Clara kept shouting reminders, "Did you pack the charger? Did you turn off the iron? While Adam carried bags to the car. I stood by the doorway, pretending to fuss with my cardigan, but really, I was memorizing their faces. There's a strange peace in knowing the people who hurt you are about to be gone, at least for a little while. When the door finally closed behind them, the silence hit like sunlight after a storm. No footsteps. No tension. No clipped laughter from the other room. Just stillness, rich and pure. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without apology. I made myself a pot of coffee, a real coffee, not Clara's organic nonsense. I sat at the kitchen table and let the smell fill the air. It was almost enough to bring back a fragment of the old days. I could picture Raymond sitting across from me, elbows on the table, reading the newspaper, humming something off-key. I smiled into my cup. The house was mine again, if only temporarily. I spent the first day cleaning, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I opened windows, let the wind in, rearranged the vases Clara had placed just so. I replaced one of her sterile white candles with a photograph of Raymond and me on our wedding day. He looked young and sunburned, holding me like he couldn't believe I was real. That by evening, the house didn't feel quite so empty. On the third day, I went into the attic. I hadn't been up there in years, not since Raymond passed. The light bulb flickered weakly, illuminating dust and cobwebs and the faint smell of cedar. Boxes were stacked neatly, labeled in my handwriting from decades ago: Christmas decor, Adam's school stuff, Ray's tools. I almost turned back, but something pulled me deeper. That's when I saw it, a small wooden box, tucked behind an old trunk. The lid was scratched, the lock long broken. I knelt slowly, my knees aching, and opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, bundled with twine. Raymond's handwriting. I sat cross-legged on the floor and began to read. They weren't romantic letters, not in the usual sense. They were little notes he'd written during our building years, things he never meant to send. Plans, dreams, reflections. Some were addressed to me, others just to himself. One said, "The walls go up tomorrow. I hope they hold more laughter than arguments. Elle deserves that." Another read. "Money's tight. Elle's working too hard. I wish I could give her more, but she keeps saying we already have everything. Maybe she's right." I pressed the pages to my heart. The words felt like a hug through time. But one letter stopped me cold. It was near the bottom of the stack, written on faded paper, the ink slightly smudged from age. "Elle. If they ever forget your worth, remind them whose name is on the wall. Love always. Ray." I stared at it for a long time. The attic was so quiet I could hear the ticking of my own pulse. Remind them whose name is on the wall. It was something he used to joke about when we were young, how I'd inherited the land, how the deed was mine, how he was just the muscle. But now, reading it again, the words felt like a command. A whisper from the past urging me not to fade into the background. I held that letter for a long time. My fingers trembled, but not from weakness, from clarity. That night, I sat on my bed, the attic dust still on my clothes, the letter open beside me. I thought about Clara's voice, sharp and careless. "She can sleep in the garage." I thought about Adam's silence, the kind that hurts more than words. And I thought about that paper tucked safely in my drawer, the deed that still bore my name. For years, I told myself it was their home now. That I was lucky to have a place. But Raymond's letter echoed in my mind, over and over, remind them whose name is on the wall. So I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I picked up the phone and called someone who still remembered me as more than a guest in my own life. Margot answered on the third ring. "Eleanor Vale." "Lord, it's been ages." Her voice burst through the receiver like sunlight. We'd known each other since our 30s, back when we both worked at the diner. She'd gone on to sell real estate, I'd stayed home to raise Adam. I hadn't seen her in years, but hearing her now felt like coming up for air. "I'm still alive, if that's what you're wondering," I said with a laugh. "And still too stubborn for my own good." "That's my Ellie," she said warmly. "So what's got you calling out of the blue?" You sound like a woman with a plan. Maybe I am, I replied quietly. You still dabble in real estate? Dabble? Honey, I retired 5 years ago. Now I help out at this senior community, Silver Pines, best decision of my life. We play bingo, drink too much tea, and gossip like teenagers. I smiled. Silver Pines, you said? Yes. It's not one of those dreary facilities, if that's what you're thinking. It's bright, social, full of old troublemakers like us. Why? You thinking about moving? Maybe, I said after a pause. Maybe it's time for something new. There was silence for a moment, then Margot's tone softened. You sound like a woman about to do something interesting. Maybe, I said again. Can I visit? Tomorrow morning. I'll make tea. The next day, I put on my nicest dress, pale blue with little white buttons, the one Raymond used to call my Sunday sunshine dress. I brushed my hair, pinned on a brooch, and drove myself to Silver Pines. The air was crisp, the sky clear enough to make you forget your age. The community was nothing like I'd imagined. It wasn't a nursing home, it was a small village of cottages surrounded by gardens and laughter. People sat outside sipping tea, reading, talking. Someone was playing piano through an open window. The place felt alive, not just surviving, but living. Margot met me by the gate, her hair silver and wild as ever. She hugged me like no time had passed. You look radiant, she said. Now come meet the gang. We've got more stories than sense. She led me to a sunroom filled with light and chatter. There were half a dozen people playing cards, someone knitting, another feeding a parrot crackers. The air smelled like lemon and lavender. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd heard laughter without tension. It wrapped around me like a blanket. Margot poured me tea. So, what's your story these days? You still living in that big house you and Ray built? I took a slow sip and smiled. For now. She raised an eyebrow. That for now sounds mighty suspicious. I didn't answer. I just looked out the window at the gardens, at the sunlight dancing on the flowers, at the people who looked free. My chest felt lighter than it had in years. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like someone's burden. I felt like someone with a choice. As Margot chatted about upcoming events, painting classes, afternoon teas, movie nights, I thought about Raymond's letter tucked in my purse. I could almost hear his voice again, steady and sure. Remind them whose name is on the wall. I smiled into my tea. I wasn't sure yet how, but I would. The first thing I felt that morning wasn't fear, it was calm. A stillness so deep it almost frightened me. It had been years since I'd woken up without that dull ache in my chest, the one that came from being tolerated instead of loved. But today felt different. I woke before dawn, made my tea, and sat by the window watching the gray light bleed into gold. Somewhere in the distance, a bird sang. Somewhere in this house, Clara's perfume still lingered faintly on the curtains. It was the last morning I'd ever spent here. Margot was waiting for me outside Silver Pines when I pulled up later that morning, her red scarf fluttering in the breeze like a flag of mischief. You ready for this? She asked, squinting at me through her sunglasses. As ready as I'll ever be, I said, my voice steady. She grinned. Good. I made an appointment with my friend Halden. Sharp as a tack, discreet as a shadow. You'll like him. The law office was a quiet building tucked between a cafe and a post office. Inside, it smelled faintly of ink and cedar polish. Mr. Halden was a thin man with kind eyes and the sort of posture that comes from decades of paperwork and precision. He stood when I entered, extending his hand. Mrs. Vale, he said warmly. Margot's told me a little about your situation. Please, sit. I settled into the leather chair, my fingers brushing the edge of my purse where Raymond's letter still rested. Thank you for seeing me on short notice. Not at all, he said, flipping open a folder. You have the deed with you? I nodded, sliding the old document across the desk. The paper had yellowed at the edges, my maiden name scrawled in black ink across the top. He studied it for a moment, adjusted his glasses, and gave a quiet whistle. "Well, Mrs. Vale," he said finally, "this is very straightforward. You inherited the land, and the property was built after your marriage. But the deed was never transferred. You still own the house outright." I blinked, pretending to be mildly surprised. "Even after my husband passed?" I assumed Adam. He shook his head. "No, ma'am. Unless you signed it over, which it seems you didn't. Legally, your son and his wife are, well, tenants. Without a lease. Tenants. Without a lease." The words rolled through my mind like thunder, soft at first, then earth-shaking. Halden continued, "If you'd like, I can prepare the paperwork to list the property. Once you sign, it's yours to sell." I stared at the window for a moment, at the faint reflection of a woman who'd once been afraid to speak too loudly in her own home. I thought of Clara's smirk, Adam's silence, the sound of that ceiling fan spinning above my narrow little bed. Then I smiled. "Let's do it." Margot chuckled softly beside me, crossing her legs. "That's my girl." Halden pushed a few pages across the desk. "You'll need to initial here, here, and sign at the bottom." The pen felt heavy in my hand, heavier than any weapon I'd ever imagined holding. My heart thudded once, twice, and then steadied. The moment my signature touched the paper, something uncoiled inside me. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it sighs. When we finished, Halden closed the folder neatly. "I'll handle the listing. Given the area, I expect offers within days, maybe even hours. It's a beautiful home, Mrs. Vale." "It used to be," I said softly. "Now it's just a shell with expensive drapes." He gave me a look that was both professional and kind. "Well, soon it'll belong to someone who'll fill it with laughter again." That night, I packed quietly. Not everything, just the things that mattered. Raymond's letters. A few photos. My jewelry box. The blue dress he loved. The rest, the furniture, the china, even the floral drapes Clara had chosen, I left behind. I boxed up my old life with care and no regret. By the second day, Halden called. "You won't believe this," he said, barely containing excitement. "A young couple saw the listing this morning. They want to make an offer. Full asking price." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Tell them congratulations. They'd like to move in immediately. I can finalize everything by the end of the week if you're ready." "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady as glass. That night, I went room to room, saying goodbye in silence. The kitchen where I'd baked Adam's first birthday cake. The porch where Raymond and I had watched the sunset every evening after work. The hallway where Clara's laughter once echoed like a warning bell. Every corner held a memory, some tender, some bitter, all fading. I ended in the little guest room they'd given me, the one with beige walls and a twin bed that smelled faintly of detergent. My suitcases were stacked neatly by the door. The house felt hollow, almost relieved. Before I left, I sat at the desk and wrote a short note on a piece of Clara's stationery. "Adam and Clara. Don't worry about my room. You won't need it anymore. Eleanor." I placed it neatly on the pillow. At sunrise, I walked out the front door for the last time. The sky was a gentle wash of pink and gold, the kind of dawn that made everything look forgiving. A truck was parked at the curb, the realtor's, I assumed. A man in a crisp suit was hammering a small white sign into the ground. "Sold." I watched as he stepped back to admire his work. The word glistened in the morning light. Margot's car pulled up just as I turned the key in the lock for the final time. She leaned out the window, sunglasses glinting. "You did it, didn't you?" I smiled. "Yes. I did." She laughed. "Well, come on then. Breakfast is on me. I know a place that makes pancakes big enough to make up for 20 years of bad mornings." As I slid into the passenger seat, the weight of the house lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running away from something. I was walking towards something, peace, perhaps. Or justice. As we drove off, the wind tugged gently at my scarf, and I looked out at the home that had once been my sanctuary, then my prison. Now, it was simply a house again. And I, for the first time in a long time, was free. The world has a funny way of balancing its scales. Sometimes, it doesn't take shouting, or vengeance, or grand gestures, just silence and a pen. I didn't need to see their faces to know what would happen when they pulled into the driveway. I could picture it perfectly as I sat at Silver Pines that afternoon, the sun melting through the windows, the scent of lemon scones wafting from the kitchen. But if I close my eyes, I can still see the scene play out in my mind. The Vale house, or rather, the house that used to be theirs, stood quiet, as if waiting for them. The moving trucks had arrived that morning. Two young people, bright-eyed and hopeful, were unloading boxes labeled kitchen, books, baby's room. The man's laughter filled the air, and the woman was holding a rolled-up rug, smiling at her new beginning. And then, down the street, Adam and Clara's car turned the corner. They were tanned, smiling, still wrapped in the glow of Italy. The kind of people who believe nothing bad can happen while the sun shines. Adam reached for the garage remote, pressing the button automatically, only to see nothing move. The garage door stayed shut. He frowned, pressed it again. Nothing. Clara adjusted her sunglasses, irritation already creasing her brow. Maybe the power's out. But as they got closer, they saw the sold sign staked in the front yard. Freshly painted, tilted slightly in the soft soil. Clara's laughter cracked first, thin, incredulous. That's a joke, right? Adam got out of the car, his voice tight. Someone must have made a mistake. The young couple looked up from the driveway, confused. Oh, hi. You must be the previous owners, the man said cheerfully. We were told the seller moved out last week. Clara blinked. Seller? The woman smiled nervously. Yes, Mrs. Vale, right? Lovely woman. She said to tell you both. She hesitated, suddenly aware of the tension building in the air, that everything was handled through her attorney. Adam's face drained of color. My mother sold this house? The realtor, a middle-aged man with a clipboard, stepped forward just in time to make it worse. Sorry, folks. You'll need to contact the seller's representative if you have questions. As of yesterday, ownership officially transferred. We were told the previous occupants had moved out voluntarily. Clara's voice sharpened like broken glass. Voluntarily? Do we look like we moved out? The realtor stepped back, clearly used to this sort of chaos but uncomfortable nonetheless. Ma'am, I just handle the paperwork. Everything was processed legally. Adam looked like he'd been punched. He tried to steady himself, gripping the car door. There has to be a mistake. My mother lived here. The realtor checked his list again. Eleanor Vale, yes. Original owner. She signed the sale herself. For a moment, all sound seemed to vanish. Just the soft thud of a moving box, a car in the distance, the faint rustle of wind through the trees. Then came the first crack in Adam's composure, a hoarse whisper. She sold it. Clara turned on him, her composure crumbling. You said the house was ours. You said it was in your name. Adam's jaw tightened. It was hers. I thought. He stopped himself, too ashamed to finish. She threw her hands up, voice trembling. Thought what? That she'd die before doing anything smart? The couple exchanged awkward glances, murmured apologies, and disappeared inside, closing the door quietly behind them, leaving the valets standing outside what used to be theirs. Adam called first. Then again. Then again. The phone at Silver Pines buzzed quietly in my purse, tucked away beside my knitting yarn. I didn't answer. Clara tried next. 5 calls in a row. Then 10. Each one angrier than the last. When the calls went to voicemail, her tone changed. The sweetness was gone. Eleanor, I don't know what game you're playing, but this isn't funny. We just got home, and there are strangers in our house. You can't just sell it without telling us. That's our home. You're destroying your family. I sat in the common room of Silver Pines, a soft wool blanket over my knees, the chatter of other residents humming like background music. Someone was playing the piano in the corner, a slow, gentle melody. I played the message twice. Not because I needed to hear her words again, but because I wanted to hear what sat underneath them: panic. Loss. The same helplessness she'd made me feel for years. Across from me, Margot was leafing through a magazine. She looked up. They called, didn't they? I smiled faintly. Several times. She grinned. And? I didn't answer. Good girl. Outside, the garden shimmered with late afternoon light. Someone was trimming roses, someone else was laughing over a crossword. It smelled like fresh coffee and peace. I poured myself another cup of tea, the same brand Clara used to say, smelled too old-fashioned. I added a spoonful of honey, stirred it slowly, and let the steam brush my face. I already tried to save it, I murmured to no one in particular. Margot tilted her head. Save what? The family, I said quietly. They didn't want it. They just wanted the house. And as the piano played on and the sun began to set beyond the tall hedges of silver pines, I realized something that made me almost laugh. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone to give me a place. I had already taken mine back. If someone had told me a year ago that a retirement community would become the best chapter of my life, I'd have laughed. Or cried. Or both. Like most people my age, I'd always imagined those places as quiet waiting rooms for the forgotten, sterile, lonely, stripped of warmth. Silver Pines wasn't that. It was sunlight and mischief wrapped in lavender sheets. The first thing I noticed when I moved in was the sound: laughter. Genuine, belly-deep laughter echoing down the hallways like music. Someone was always humming, someone always baking. The walls weren't gray, they were the soft color of dawn. Even the air smelled alive, like fresh bread and lilacs. The staff greeted me by name on the first morning. The Mrs. Vale, welcome home, said a young nurse named Mia, no older than my granddaughter would have been if I'd ever had one. She showed me to my suite, a cozy room with a balcony overlooking the garden. There was a small kitchenette, a reading chair, and sunlight spilling through gauzy curtains. You'll like it here, she said. Everyone's got stories. Some of them bite. I smiled. So do I. That was my first real smile in months. By the end of the first week, I had friends, real friends. Not the forced kind made at family gatherings where everyone measures their words. These were people who'd lived, hurt, healed, and learned to laugh anyway. Vivian was the first to claim me. 80, glamorous, always in pearls, and completely unbothered by time. My son sold my piano to buy a Tesla, she confessed over breakfast. So I sold his car while he was at work. Tit for tat, darling. It keeps the blood warm. Ruth was quieter, widowed, young, gentle eyes, and a wicked sense of humor when she chose to show it. My daughter said I'd cramp her lifestyle if I stayed with her. So here I am, cramping no one's style. Then there was Lyle, the only man at our table, a retired mail carrier with hands that still trembled when he told stories of Vietnam. My grandkids only call when they need Wi-Fi help, he said once. But that's okay. Gives me an excuse to hang up early. Together, we were an unlikely quartet, bonded by bruised hearts and a shared sense of rebellion. Every morning, we'd meet in the dining hall for coffee and gossip. The place buzzed with small revolutions, a hidden bottle of sherry, a rigged bingo card, a prank involving a motion sensor Santa. These weren't people waiting for their lives to end. They were living louder than ever. Silver Pines isn't a prison, Vivian said one afternoon as we painted watercolors in the courtyard. It's freedom in disguise. You'll see. She was right. The first time I picked up a paintbrush, I felt something I hadn't in years, the thrill of creation. My hands trembled, but the strokes came easy. Colors bloomed across the paper, blues like the sky above my old porch, greens like the oak tree I'd once planted with Raymond. Mia stopped by, peering over my shoulder. "That's beautiful," she said softly. I smiled. "It's supposed to be my old garden." "Well," she said, "it looks like it's growing back." That made me laugh, not politely, not quietly, but fully. The kind of laugh that shakes something loose in your chest. It became my rhythm: morning tea with Ruth, watercolor at noon, evening walks with Lyle, and weekly gossip sessions with Vivian. We called ourselves the Pine Needles, sharp, stubborn, evergreen. We weren't naive. We all had scars. But Silver Pines had a way of turning pain into punchlines. It was revenge through thriving. One afternoon, during our usual card game, Ruth leaned toward me. "You're the woman who sold her house, aren't you?" I froze. "Word travels fast, I see." She chuckled. "Sweetheart, around here gossip spreads faster than arthritis." Vivian fanned herself with a card. "They're calling you the landlady of justice. You've got half the dining hall wishing they'd done the same thing." Lyle smirked. "My favorite part is that you didn't yell. You just sold the house. That's artistry." I tried to brush it off. "I didn't mean to make a statement." Vivian arched an eyebrow. "Then what did you mean to do?" I thought for a moment, stirring my tea. "I just wanted my peace back." Ruth reached over and patted my hand. "You found it, honey." And she was right. Peace didn't come in grand gestures or apologies. It came in laughter over lemon pie, in watercolor stains on my sleeves, in late-night storytelling under twinkling garden lights. Silver Pines became my sanctuary, a place where no one told me to stay out of the way, where no one sighed when I spoke. Sometimes, in the evenings, I'd sit on my balcony, watch the sunset melt into gold, and listen to the sound of the world moving on without me. Not in sadness, in relief. Because for the first time in a long time, I didn't need anyone to make room for me. I'd built my OWNIT was a Saturday morning, the kind that hummed with routine peace. I just finished my watercolor class and was heading toward the dining hall when I heard it, a voice I hadn't heard in months. "Mom?" The word froze me mid-step. When I turned, I saw him, Adam, standing at the entrance of Silver Pines, holding a wilted bouquet of supermarket flowers. His eyes were swollen, his shirt wrinkled, as if he'd driven all night. And beside him stood Clara, clutching her handbag like a shield, her expression a mix of guilt and irritation. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The automatic doors closed behind them with a soft hiss, sealing the awkwardness in like a bubble. "Mom," Adam tried again, voice breaking. "We didn't mean it. Any of it. You should have told me you felt unwelcome." I took a slow breath, steadying the tremor that wanted to escape my chest. Around us, residents had paused their morning chatter. Vivian peeked over her newspaper from the corner, Ruth froze with her teacup midair. Even the staff sensed it, that tension of a long overdue reckoning. "You didn't need me to tell you," I said softly. "You just needed to listen." Adam's shoulders slumped. "I know. I just..." Clara interrupted, her voice sharp but trembling. "We were stressed, Eleanor. You know that. The move, the mortgage, the baby plans, we didn't mean the garage thing, okay? It was a joke gone too far." A few people in the lounge turned to look at her. She flushed, realizing how small her excuse sounded in this place where pain had been turned into wisdom. I stepped closer, my voice steady. I heard every word. Her lips parted, but I didn't let her speak again. "The garage was my breaking point," I said. "But selling the house, that was my closure." Adam's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, please don't say that. We're sorry. We really are. We miss you." He reached out, the flowers trembling in his hand. For a second, I almost softened. He was still my son, still the boy who once built me a Mother's Day card out of macaroni and glue. But then I remembered standing in that same garage, listening to them argue about how inconvenient I'd become, and I remembered the silence that followed, how no one came looking for me when I left. So I did what I needed to do. I smiled, not cruelly, just calmly, like someone who had already made peace with her ghosts. I hope you both find the peace you were looking for, I said. I already found mine. Then I turned and walked toward the courtyard, where the late morning sun spilled over the rose bushes. My friends were there, Vivian waving, Ruth smiling softly, while pretending not to eavesdrop but doing a terrible job at it. Behind me, I heard Adam call out one last time, his voice breaking in half. Mom, please. But I didn't turn around. The doors of Silver Pines slid shut between us, not like a barrier, but like the closing of a chapter that had been waiting too long to end. As I stepped into the light, Vivian leaned over and whispered, "Was that who I think it was?" I nodded, and, she asked, raising a brow. I exhaled, finally smiling. They knocked on the wrong door. Vivian smirked. Good. Let them stay outside. And for the first time since that night in the garage, I felt nothing but peace. I didn't expect the story to spread. In fact, I thought it would end at the gates of Silver Pines, my quiet rebellion tucked neatly into the folds of routine, like a secret only the morning sun and I shared. But peace, it seems, has a way of echoing louder than rage. It started with a journalist, a polite young woman named Nina who visited the community for a human interest segment. She wanted to write about seniors finding joy in late life. Somehow, word of the woman who sold her house out from under her ungrateful family reached her before she reached me. When she asked if I'd talk, I hesitated. I'm not looking for attention, I told her. She smiled. Then let's call it inspiration. 2 days later, her article was published. Elderly widow teaches family a lesson in self-respect, and finds herself in the process. By the following week, my name was everywhere. Online forums, morning talk shows, even a viral video clip of a young woman saying, "I want to be like Eleanor Vale when I'm old," soft voice, iron spine. Silver Pines hummed with excitement. Residents kept stopping me in the halls with knowing grins. Saw you on the internet, dear, Vivian teased one morning over breakfast. You're practically a celebrity. I rolled my eyes, laughing. Lord help me. The last thing I need is fame at 72. But it was the letters that undid me. They began arriving by the dozen, handwritten, typed, even a few smudged with tears. One from Arizona read, "I live with my daughter, her husband, and their 2 boys. I thought I had to stay quiet to keep the peace. After reading about you, I realized silence isn't peace, it's surrender. Thank you." Another came from Oregon, "You reminded me that my name is still on the lease. Maybe it's time I start living again." I kept them all in a shoebox under my bed. Each one felt like a whispered prayer from someone who'd forgotten their own strength. Meanwhile, beyond the walls of Silver Pines, poetic irony was busy at work. Clara's glittering social circle, the women she once bragged to about her modern home and perfect life, now whispered her name like it was a cautionary tale. At brunches and luncheons, her friends clucked their tongues sympathetically, but the gossip was merciless. She made her mother-in-law sleep in the guest room? Or was it the garage? Can you imagine? And then the old lady sold the house? Good for her, honestly. Clara's pride began to splinter. The woman who once curated her image with surgical precision, the house, the car, the reputation, now found herself shrinking from the very world she tried to impress. As for Adam, his voice on the few messages he left grew smaller each week. Gone was the anger, replaced with exhaustion, regret. "Mom, we're fine," he said once, though I could hear the hum of traffic behind him, not the quiet neighborhood I knew. Just, smaller place. It's an adjustment. Through a friend of a friend, I later learned the truth, a cramped 2-bedroom apartment near the freeway. Thin walls, loud neighbors, no yard. A far cry from the life they'd built on my foundation. And yet, I didn't smile out of spite. I didn't want them to suffer, only to understand. That evening, I sat in the Silver Pines garden as the sun dipped low, painting the sky the same shade of orange Raymond used to call Sunday light. I opened my journal, feeling the quiet hum of life around me, laughter from the lounge, birds in the distance, the scent of warm bread from the kitchen. I wrote. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with sirens or applause. Sometimes, it just sits in a sunny dining room, with fresh bread and laughter, reminding you that peace was always yours to reclaim. When I closed the notebook, I felt a stillness settle inside me, not revenge, not pride. Just the kind of quiet that follows after you've finally stopped apologizing for needing space. Silver Pines wasn't my retirement. It was my resurrection. The knock came softly this time. No desperation, no flowers, no performative guilt. Just a simple, hesitant rhythm, 3 quiet taps that seemed to ask permission rather than demand entry. I knew it was him before I even opened the door. Adam stood there, shoulders slumped, a different man from the one who had shown up months ago. He wasn't wearing the pressed shirts or the polished shoes Clara used to insist on. His eyes looked tired but clear, like he'd finally stopped pretending everything was fine. "Hi, Mom," he said gently. I smiled faintly. "You found your way back." He gave a weak laugh. "Wasn't easy. I think my GPS judged me twice for taking this route." I stepped aside, motioning him in. The common room of Silver Pines was quiet that morning, soft piano music playing in the background, Ruth knitting by the window, Vivian dozing in her chair with a magazine open upside down. We sat down at my table, the same one I'd claimed since I moved here. 2 teacups, 1 plate of biscuits, and that old kettle that whistled like it had opinions. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy with everything we hadn't said. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I didn't come to talk about the house," he said. "Or Clara." I nodded. "Good." He swallowed hard. "I came because I realized something. I didn't just forget what you did for me, I forgot who you were. You were always there. The one person who never made me feel small. And somehow, I let someone else make you feel that way." His voice cracked on the last words, and for a second, I saw the little boy who used to run to me after every scraped knee, holding his tears back until he reached my arms. "Adam," I said softly, "you don't need to apologize for the house. That was never about bricks or money." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I know. It was about respect." "Respect," I repeated, pouring the tea, "has a price tag most people can't afford: time, effort, humility. You forgot to make the payments." He let out a quiet breath, half laugh, half sigh. "You're right. And I'm sorry, Mom. Not just for what I said or didn't say. I'm sorry for forgetting your humanity. You're not just my mother, you're a person. You deserved better from me." That one reached me. Forgiveness isn't a single act, it's a series of small, deliberate releases. And in that moment, I felt one of the last knots in my chest begin to loosen. "You're forgiven," I said simply. "But I need you to understand something." He looked up, attentive. "You can visit," I said, "but not to unload guilt. Come to share stories. To laugh. To live." He smiled, small and sincere. "I'd like that." I poured him another cup of tea, just like I used to when he was young and worried about exams. He cupped the mug in both hands, inhaling the steam. For a moment, the years between us disappeared, and it was just mother and son again, 2 people learning how to talk without the weight of expectation. We spent the rest of the afternoon reminiscing, about Raymond's terrible singing, about the night Adam had tried to fix a leaky faucet and flooded the kitchen, about how love, no matter how worn, has its way of finding new shapes. When he finally stood to leave, he hugged me, not out of obligation, but out of need. I felt the quiet sincerity in that embrace, and I held him just long enough to remind him that forgiveness wasn't a weakness. It was my inheritance to him. As he stepped toward the door, he hesitated. "Clara won't be coming," he said softly. I nodded. I didn't expect her to. He lingered a second longer, then smiled faintly. "You really do look happy here, Mom." "I am," I said. "Sometimes you have to lose a house to find a home." After he left, I sat by the window, watching him walk down the path lined with blooming lavender. He looked lighter somehow, freer, even. Vivian shuffled over with her ever-present tea and muttered, "Was that your son again?" Yes, I said, smiling. This time, he didn't knock on the wrong door, she chuckled, settling beside me. Good. Maybe he's finally learning. Maybe, I said, gazing out at the sunlight painting the courtyard gold. But deep down, I felt something stir, that strange whisper of unfinished fate. The air around me felt charged, like a page waiting for one more line. Peace had found me, yes. But I couldn't shake the feeling that life, unpredictable, poetic life, still had one more twist to reveal. Spring came early that year. Silver pines bloomed in a way that made even the oldest hearts feel young again. The air carried the scent of orange blossoms and warm bread from the kitchen. I spent most mornings on my balcony, tending to the small pots of lavender I'd planted, listening to the sound of laughter drifting up from the garden below. Life had settled into a kind of golden rhythm, quiet, steady, full of grace. Adam visited every few weeks, just as I'd asked, not to apologize anymore, but to share stories. He brought news of his new job, photos of the apartment he was finally making into a home, and sometimes, a loaf of bread he'd baked himself. Each time, I noticed the guilt had faded a little more from his eyes, replaced by something gentler, understanding. Clara never came. Her absence, I realized, was its own kind of peace. One bright Thursday morning, Vivian burst into the dining hall waving her tablet. New neighbors are moving in, she announced, eyes twinkling. You'll like them, Eleanor, a young couple and the husband's mother. Seems lovely. New faces are always good, I said, smiling. Keeps the place alive. By afternoon, a small commotion began outside the east wing. Movers carried boxes labeled kitchen, linens, books. I walked out to see who was joining us and stopped short when I recognized the elderly woman stepping carefully out of a sedan. It was Dolores Mendoza, the widow of my old housekeeper, Carmen. Carmen had worked for me for years back in the old neighborhood, long before Raymond passed. She'd retired after her husband fell ill, and though I'd offered help, she'd refused, insisting, Mrs. Vale, you've done enough. God will see me through. Clara had once mocked her at a dinner party. Poor woman, she'd said, twirling her wine glass. Probably can't even afford to stop scrubbing floors. I remember how I'd winced at that, and how Carmen had pretended not to hear. But now, fate, in its quiet, mischievous wisdom, had brought her back into my orbit. I walked over as Dolores adjusted her shawl. Her son, Mateo, looked up, weary but kind-eyed. Excuse me, he said. Could you tell us where the reception office is? Of course, I said, smiling. But first, Dolores Mendoza. I'd know that grace anywhere. Her eyes widened. Mrs. Vale? My goodness. Look at you. We hugged, the years melting away. Her hands were still strong, her spirit still intact. She laughed, saying, and to think, my boy found this place online. Said it looked peaceful. I didn't know I'd find an old friend too. Mateo smiled, glancing between us. You two know each other? Dolores chuckled. She was my employer once, the good kind. Not like some I've known. We both knew who she meant. That evening, I baked my lemon cake, Raymond's favorite recipe, the one I'd nearly forgotten before moving here. I carried it down the hall, warm and fragrant, and knocked on their new door. Dolores opened it, her smile wide. You didn't have to. I wanted to, I said, handing it over. Welcome home. She touched my hand gently. Home, she repeated. That sounds nice. Later, sitting on my balcony, I watched the sunset spill honey-colored light over the gardens. Below, the new family laughed together, a sound full of hope and second chances. I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me. I thought of all the versions of myself that had lived and died in that house I'd once called mine, the young woman who believed love could be built from walls, the mother who mistook silence for gratitude, the widow who thought endurance was strength. They were all gone now, replaced by something simpler. Something freer. I used to think revenge meant anger. But it's quieter than that, it's peace, while they still wonder how you found it. The wind brushed my hair back as I looked toward the horizon, the sky rippling in gold. From the courtyard, laughter echoed, the sound of people who had learned, in their own ways, to begin again. And there I sat, Eleanor Vale, the woman who sold her house, and finally bought her freedom. Summer settled over Silver Pines like a warm memory. The lemon tree in the courtyard, the one I'd planted my first month here, had finally begun to bear fruit. Every morning, I picked one or two for the kitchen staff, who used them for tea or pie. Sometimes, I'd leave a few on Dolores's doorstep with a note, fresh from freedom's soil. She always laughed, saying, "Only you would turn lemons into poetry, Eleanor." Adam visited last Sunday. He brought a small potted plant, a lemon sapling. "For your balcony," he said. "So you'll always have a piece of home." I smiled, running my fingers over its tender leaves. "Home," I said. "Funny how it keeps finding me." When he left, I placed the sapling by the railing, sunlight spilling across its tiny branches. Below, laughter drifted from the garden, mingling with birdsong and the scent of fresh bread. And in that moment, I knew, I hadn't just sold a house. I'd planted a new life, and it was finally blooming.